you very much. What a nice welcome. This is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful welcome and a wonderful introduction by Will. I appreciate it very much. It sounds like this must be the state of freedom out here. Wonderful. I want to thank everybody who's put so much effort into, because you had at least 3 months to get ready for this function, didn't you? But all of a sudden, a lot of people show up. That means the issue of liberty is alive and well and growing. That's what I believe, and I think that's what I'm witnessing right here today. But it is great to be among so many friends, and Elizabeth, it's great to see you again, and I appreciate very much all your work over the years. And I can't help but think about somebody that was a very, very good friend of Elizabeth and mine and many of you people here, because I can't think of Idaho without thinking about liberty, without thinking about Ralph Smead. There is no doubt. He was always convinced ideas did have consequences, and I think that's absolutely true. Also with me today is my wife, Carol, 55 years of marriage. And we have one of our 18 grandchildren. Linda's with us today. But our trip out here to the Northwest has been fantastic. It's much more than I had anticipated, and the turnouts have been great, and the enthusiasm is great. But the big job we have is translating that into a few victories, and that's what we're looking forward to. But there's been a lot of work and effort put into the campaign and all the efforts, and there's a lot of good news out there that's not quite yet on the Main Street media. You know, they don't always report what's going on. And the delegate count is coming along quite well, and we have an opportunity to add quite a few more delegates right here in this state. But our country has we've gotten ourselves into a big mess. And the one thing different from 5 years ago or even 10 years ago is most Americans realize it now. But for a long time, we've kept our head in the sand, and people were in denial. They didn't want to worry about tomorrow. If you can live for today and you can borrow more money, prices of houses are going up, we can keep borrowing and live high on the hog forever and ever. But all of a sudden, the big bubble has burst. We've had small bubbles bursting all along. The big bubble started in 1971 when the last link of gold to our dollar was taken away, and that ushered in this huge bubble. And that is the reason we can't ignore monetary policy. We will address monetary policy, and we will address the subject of the Federal Reserve System and the return to a gold standard. But about 100 years ago, that was when the Fed was started, 1913. Matter of fact, we have 1 year to go for the 100th anniversary. Wouldn't it be a neat time that we repeal the Federal Reserve Act at 100 years? One thing for certainty, the system that we have, whether we get around to repealing the law, one thing is this system can't continue. And that's what American people have discovered now. We cannot keep borrowing and spending and printing money, more regulations. We do too much of it, it causes a crisis. So what do they do in Washington? They spend even more money, they print more money, they regulate even more, and they turn it over to the Fed and they print more money, and they wonder why it doesn't solve our problems. Well, they have their head in the sand, and they are in denial. They're not willing to say that economic interventionism, Keynesianism, paper money doesn't work. The founders knew that. That's why they gave us a document that said there shouldn't be a central bank, that only gold and silver could be legal tender, and that you could not print money. So they knew it back then. We ought to take their advice and change our way of living today. But in that fateful year of 1913, we had a few other things going on. We had not only the Federal Reserve coming into existence, we had that other little document changed, the 16th Amendment, which needs to be repealed, obviously. The income tax in a free society is not appropriate. If you want to live in a true republic and a government dedicated to protection of liberty, you don't need to declare ownership of everybody's income and then permit each and every one of us a certain percentage that we can keep. That principle of ownership of all that we earn has to be challenged because it comes from a very basic understanding. Our lives and our liberties come from our Creator, not from our government. And if that is true, the natural consequence of that is we ought to have the right to keep the fruits of our labor. But also in the Woodrow Wilson era, our foreign policy was changed, and he took it, and it was always, he based it on a form of idealism, a false idealism. His idealism was that it is the moral obligation of the American people to make the whole world safe for democracy. Well, it hasn't been very safe since 1914, and certainly the goal shouldn't be this dedication to pure democracy. Matter of fact, pure democracy undermines the republic. That's what the founders worried about. They wanted a republic, not a pure democracy. And yet, over this last 100 years, there was an evolution. We went from a republic to a democracy. Now, rights are relative. They're relative to the demands of the majority. The majority becomes the dictatorship, and certain groups get together. They get together and they gang up on the productive system. The non-productive, the special interests, gang up on the individuals who basically are the middle class, who's willing to work and take care of themselves, and all with the pretense that we're going to help the very, very poor who are falling through the cracks. But guess who gets all the help? The very wealthy, who are tied into the banking system, tied into the Federal Reserve, tied into the military-industrial complex, tied into the lobbying system and all the power they have in Washington. So we have changed our course of history by accepting a form of government that is not compatible with our Constitution. Now, it is true that we could have changed our Constitution systematically if this is what we wanted, but we didn't want it. We ignored the Constitution. So the solution is very simple. Send only people to Washington who believe in and will obey the Constitution. There is no doubt we would have a different form of government and our country would be a lot wealthier. Instead of spending $4 trillion worth of debt overseas in the last 10 years, that $4 trillion would have been spent here at home, and there would have been a lot more wealth here at home. But today we have very few who are determined to follow the letter of the law, and yet everybody in Washington takes that oath. They take the oath to obey the Constitution. But just think, if we were strict adherents to the Constitution, would the federal government be involved in education? We don't need the Department of Education. It's unconstitutional. that just happens to be one of the 5 departments that I would like to get rid of rather rapidly, as fast as we can. But if we don't do this, our economic problems are going to get much worse. Our civil liberties are going to continue to deteriorate. So, other than getting rid of the 5 departments and going back to the 06 budget line, I do want to immediately, in the first year, cut $1 trillion out of the budget. Now, if you're interested in making comparisons, I think you know what the current administration will do. I think they've just given us a budget. It didn't go down. But look at the other Republican candidates. Are they offering any cuts? No. But they'll say they are. They're saying, well, we're, even some of the budget proposals that came out of the stalemate in the Congress and then the stalemate and the confusion with the super committee and then the automatic cuts, they're talking about $1 trillion of cuts. They aren't cuts. They're cuts of the proposed increases. They're planning in this line item budgeting. We're supposed to be able to spend $10 trillion of new money over the next 10 years. So they're going to cut $1 trillion out of these proposed increases, and they call that cuts. Now, if you cut $1 trillion, over 10 years, that's $100 billion a year. Our national debt is going up $100 billion every month. I mean, that's how far removed they are from reality. So, one thing I sense is the American people are waking up. They realize how bad things are. They're trying to speak out and trying to get the attention of Washington. But I'll tell you what, people I know there, except for very few, they don't have any idea the seriousness of this problem that we have. They think that we are somehow going to be protected because we still have the reserve currency of the world and they're still taking our dollars. But if it were true that we could keep spending money, running up $1 trillion a year debt, or $1.5 trillion, and we print the money that we need. If that were true, guess what? None of us would ever have to work again. All we do is print money and let the foreigners work for us, and we just spend our money. Everybody knows that's not true. So reality will set in, and there is no reason in the world to think that we are not immune from the kind of conditions that are existing in Greece today. And that's what we have to live up to and believe, that we have to get down to the basics and say we have to cut, we have to balance our budget, we have to have sound money, we have to restore the Constitution. But since 100 years ago, our freedoms didn't disappear overnight. Matter of fact, the disintegration of the currency didn't occur immediately. Between 1913 and 1971, there was steady deterioration of the value of our currency. But in 1971, when the last link to gold was severed, we have since that time lost 85% of the 1971 dollar. Since 1913, since the Fed was created to protect the value of our money, we've lost 98% of the value of a 1913 dollar, and they consider that success. Well, they've gotten away with that for a long time. They were always giving credit. The Fed was given the credit for creating the booms, and everybody likes the boom periods. But if they understand economics and Austrian free market economics, you have to realize for every boom there's a bust, and we have been having those constantly. But up until now, the Fed always got credit for getting us out of the bust. They would just print more money, and it seemed to work. Governments would spend more money, print more money, and the confidence was there enough. We just accumulated more and more debt. Now we're up against a wall. We can't just keep accumulating more debt. Our credit rating has gone down once. It's going to go down again, and we're on the road to a real economic catastrophe as long as we continue to do this. So it is up to the current generation. I used to talk a lot, and people still do talk about, we have to quit doing this and running up this debt, or we'll pass it on to the next generation. Guess what? We are the next generation, and we have to deal with the debt and the crisis that we have today.